pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger, roll, Atlanta.
Water towers can fly!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight down speed off. Bring in, speed off.
Yikes. You bet. Okay. We don't need any more of these.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to NSF Live, the weekly show where we like to go through all of the space news of the week, at least as much as we can touch on in an hour and a half. I'll be your host today, Stephen Marr. I'll be pulling questions and stuff, so make sure you go ahead and get those questions in ASAP so I can throw them in the queue, and we'll get to as many as we can. Remember to tag at NASASpaceflight so that we can see them. Joining me today over here, we've got Thomas Burghardt. How you doing, Thomas?
I'm doing well, Stephen. Glad to be back on the show.
Absolutely. And on my other side, we have Ian Atkinson. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. Excited for another episode of NSF Live.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you all for joining us in the chat over there. We will start to see your questions populate here momentarily, but I think what we'll do is start with some launches. We had a few launches. The first one we're going to talk about, none of us here got to see it in person. I didn't even get to watch it live online because it was during remote setup for the Atlas V launch. So we had Rocket Lab down in New Zealand launching from their brand spanking new launch pad. What was this mission all about, Thomas?
Yeah, so this was the Owl's Night Continues, which is a kind of a play on the previous mission, which was the Owl's Night Begins. This is another Earth observation satellite for Inspective. This was the Strix Beta satellite, which followed the Strix Alpha satellite, launched on a different Rocket Lab rocket earlier, and so another mission for them. But the big notable thing about this mission, like you mentioned, was that new launch pad. Rocket Lab has been adding two new launch pads to go along with Launch Complex 1A, which was the original launch pad that had launched all of the Electron missions up till now. This is now Launch Complex 1B, a second pad in that same complex down in New Zealand. And of course, they're also working on Launch Complex 2, which is at Wallops Flight Facility here in the United States. So this was bringing their second pad online finally, able to start ramping up their launch cadence by removing that pad turnaround constraint and how all the work that needs to be done on the launch pad itself between flights. So a successful debut for the pad, and of course the mission itself was also a success, successfully deployed that satellite into its low Earth orbit, and hopefully that now that this pad is online, we'll get to see a lot more Rocket Lab launches in quicker succession. They'll be able to launch more frequently.
Yeah, and I think before the launch, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but I didn't watch live. They put out a video which had an Electron on both pads. Now, they took the one down off of 1A before they launched the one on 1B, right?
Yeah, there was no rocket on 1A during the actual launch, but they did definitely take the photo opportunity to get two rockets out there at the same time. And who knows, maybe a certain mission campaign will actually require two launches in very quick succession to the point where you'll have two rockets there, either both vertical or maybe the one will be horizontal and then get raised vertical right after. But either way, it would be cool to see that again. But otherwise, yeah, only one rocket actually out there at the time of launch.
Yeah. And let's see, was this the first launch for Rocket Lab this year?
As a matter of fact, it was, yes. And that actually comes after a bit of a delay. There was a different Rocket Lab mission that was supposed to launch before this, and then the payload customer for that mission required a short delay, and so Rocket Lab kind of reshuffled their manifest, and this mission became the first of the year. And so we'll expect that other mission, which I believe it was something with Spaceflight Incorporated, because I remember the mission patch had the Seattle skyline on it, but I'm forgetting what the actual payload was. Might have been a couple Black Sky satellites again. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly. Ian, do you remember?
I don't remember, but I do. This was interesting when the Owl's Night Begins came up, because I was like, wait, wasn't there supposed to be a different launch? It seemed like they did a little shuffle around of their manifest, but that whatever the launch was supposed to be, that should be coming up next from Pad 1A, and I think that's what the rocket was on Pad 1A.
It was two Black Sky satellites, and it was named Without Mission a Beat was the name of that mission.
Yep.
So yeah, I quick check, they were Black Sky satellites, and that will probably be the next mission now, sometime this month probably. But that's the other flight we were talking about there, and that might actually be the other rocket that was out on the pad was probably the rocket for that mission.
Well, I want to hit this question here, put y'all on the spot. John Halstead saying, how many active launch pads are there in the world currently?
Oh my! All right. All right. Well, no, let's do it. All right. Let's see. So let's start with the United States. This should be fresh in all of our memories. At Wallops Flight Facility, I'm gonna start northeast and work my way around. So Wallops, there's the Antares pad, which is 0A. There's a Minotaur pad 0B, and I wouldn't call Launch Complex 2 active yet, right? So those are the two at Wallops. Let's go to Cape Canaveral. 39B technically is inactive right now, so let's say 39A, 41, 40, the Delta 4 pad, 37B. 46 is active.
Yeah.
And I guess the other pads are all technically inactive right now, right?
Right.
Like
Well, oh yeah, 46 is where they launched.
That's where Astra just launched from, and I think it's still technically like a possible Minotaur pad, so like that's an active complex.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah. Also, the abort ascent for Orion they did from there, didn't they? Right.
I think those are all the Cape active pads. Does anything at Star?
I really expected.
I'm assuming no, we're gonna go through this. Assuming we count Starbase, assuming we're only counting orbital pads. I wouldn't add anything at Starbase yet.
Okay.
So let's go to Vandy. There's the Falcon 9 pad 4 East. There's the Atlas pad and the Vandy and the Delta pad. Oh, the old Delta 2 pad that's for Alpha. That's active now, so we're up to 11.
I missed that one. Yep.
And then there's the Minotaur pad at Vandy.
There's some Minotaur pad.
It's like 576 or something. It's a weird number. Anything else at Vandy?
I'm counting 15.
15?
I originally was counting pad A and pad B at Boca, but those are suborbital.
Yeah. And then Kodiak. There's at least one of the pads at Kodiak can be considered active.
Mm-hmm.
Are we really good? Okay. There's
I don't know, man.
one at Tenerife. There's 2 Japanese launch pads. There's now 2 in New Zealand. I'm up to like 17 or something.
It is giving me a good opportunity to queue up some questions, though.
Yeah, I got you. No worries.
Maybe at 19.
How many are there in India? 3?
I don't know.
I think there's like 3 at India.
China
becomes a problem because I don't know how many complexes are at each of the launch ranges. China might be a lost cause. I don't remember. And then there's all the pads at Vostokny, all the ones at Plesetsk, all the ones at Baikonur.
And Plesetsk is their classified site, so you're not going to find much on that.
Yeah. Oh, and then Kourou has
3.
So a lot. I'm gonna go with a lot. Maybe I'll do some more in-depth research and come up with a number on Twitter later or something. Because the problem is I have no idea how many Chinese pads there are.
And Mace Bob Casson saying Thomas's willingness to take us through every active pad is why I'm a member of the Thomas fan club.
I am glad that you enjoyed that.
I wish we had like an applause clap.
I love those questions. I love those kind of questions. What's the next new one that's gonna join? So Rocket Lab brought on that one. What's the next new launch pad?
Maybe orbital pad, Starship orbital.
Starship orbital pad. Is there? Well, or does 39B become active again first? That would be my bet. Is the 39B gets returned to the active list again? Would be my bet. But unless there's some other new. Oh, but there's also that new Chinese rocket that probably has its own. I don't know. There might be another one.
All right. We should probably move on.
Any other Rocket Lab questions?
Yeah. Actually, we do. Musical Wolves saying, why do Rocket Lab's engines always look like a pumpkin when in space?
Like a pumpkin? Oh, the orange. Upper stage. I was very confused for a second.
Yeah. It's very orange.
Yeah, so they turn orange because they're hot. And the upper stage engine. So the first stage engine, they first need to understand how rocket engines cool themselves. And what they do on the first stage engines, like the Falcon 9 Merlin, the RD-180, most rocket engines on a first stage use regenerative cooling, I believe it's called, where they pump some propellants through the nozzle to cool the nozzle because you have really cool propellants and really hot flames in the nozzle. You don't want to melt your nozzle. So you use the cold propellants to cool the nozzle. On the upper stage engine, because you have such a large nozzle, They don't use regenerative cooling on the entire thing because it would just be so heavy and so complicated. If you see the top part of the nozzle is gray, the top part's gray, that part's regeneratively cooled. But the nozzle extension from the bolts downward, that is ablatively cooled, which basically means it chips away tiny, tiny particles of the rocket engine as the engine burns. So it kind of melts away the rocket nozzle, and that keeps it cool. And that's why it's glowing orange, because it is really hot because it's not being actively cooled.
Wow, great explanation. Thank you, Ian.
Ian's the propulsion expert around here, by the way. In case anyone hasn't noticed, he knows his stuff about rocket engines. So
I kind of want to work on them in the future.
And Moldy Space Adventures, just with a quick super chat, Thomas Pad Club. So.
Oh, jeez, very nice. Thank you.
But I did queue up a couple more Rocket Lab ones. Okay, yeah, Craig Staus saying, didn't Rocket Lab have plans to launch from Wallops over a year ago? Issues? ?
Yeah, the big obstacle has just been there have been some delays getting their flight termination system ready to go at Wallops because they're working with NASA on basically developing this automated flight termination system that they also plan to sell to other companies. And they're getting the certification needed for that system to be active, and that's required to launch from Wallops. So that has, as far as we know, been the main obstacle. There was a step forward not too long ago, NASA reaching some milestone with it, but I'm not sure it's quite flight readiness yet. So still waiting to hear from Rocket Lab when that pad will come online, but it should be, in theory, sometime this year, although, like you said, it's been delayed a little bit.
And it could also be that they get approval to launch from there long before they actually launch one. Like just because the approval comes this year doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be a launch from there this year.
They've also moved a couple missions that were originally slated to launch from Wallops to Mahia in New Zealand because of the delays. So I'm not even sure what, like, the first mission that's still manifested for Wallops. I don't even know what that mission is. There was a DoD mission at first, which got moved to New Zealand. The capstone mission for NASA is now launching from New Zealand. So I don't off the top of my head, I don't even know what that mission would be.
Now, you mentioned that they're developing the automated flight termination system to sell to other companies?
Yeah,
Like
so if another
competitors?
like another rocket company that's developing a rocket, probably another small sat launcher, wants to use an automated flight termination system, they can buy the system off of Rocket Lab rather than developing their own. Just off the top of my head, there's a whole slew of new kind of small sat launch companies that are up and coming that might be interested in that, just to remove some development work that they would have to do.
Rocket Lab really does want to be that one-stop shop for all things spaceflight, don't they?
They are winning contracts to build satellites, which is obviously not something that a launch provider normally does. Although SpaceX kind of got into that realm, they have some Starlink-related contracts for a couple satellites, but for the most part, Rocket Lab is really, diversifying the kind of things that they can produce. It's not just launch services, which is pretty neat to see.
Yeah. Okay, one last Rocket Lab question, and then we will move on. Ethan Hoos saying, do we know when or what mission we'll see the first helicopter catch?
We don't. Rocket Lab probably does. But stay tuned on that, I think.
Yeah.
I think this year is the plan, to be extremely vague, but I believe it is this year.
Right.
Yeah, Rocket Lab keeps their cards very close to their chest on their future manifest. Like, it's difficult to figure out what missions are coming up. They keep their cards very close to their chest.
All right, moving on. The next launch of the previous week would have been the Atlas V GOES-T launch, which was beautiful. I, as a photographer, just love shooting Atlas. It's such a photogenic rocket, but it's not all about photos and videos. What did we have on board?
Yeah, this was the latest new weather satellite for the United States, the GOES-T, part of the greater GOES constellation that's jointly operated by NOAA and NASA.
I think I know what it stands for. Geostationary Operational Environmental Satellite.
I believe it if you, I actually don't remember off the top of my head. Wait.
Oh, man. I was reading our article on it earlier.
Yep, you got it. Yep.
Operational or observational?
Operational.
Operational. Cool.
So there you go. So yeah, this is the newest satellite launched on an Atlas 541. So we got 4 solids. It was a nice loud launch. Steven's, of course, got it actually in his background here. He came prepared for today's show, so well done, Steven.
This actually isn't from this launch.
You would have fooled me.
Yeah, it's just a very, very similar look to it.
But yeah, a successful launch on the Atlas V, and that satellite will become GOES 18 once it reaches orbit. So the GOES satellites launch with a letter designation, and then once they're successfully in orbit, ready to begin actual operations, they change to a number designation, which removes some confusion for if a satellite fails, like the launch fails, or the satellite fails during like on-orbit maneuvering or something. The launch designations don't make the operational designations confusing, if that makes sense. Because you'd have like skipped numbers and things. But yeah, otherwise successfully deployed into a transfer orbit towards its operational geostationary orbit, and the satellite has begun some checkouts and maneuvering to start making its way towards the operational orbit. It won't begin operations until January of next year. There's a lot of checkouts that they do on these satellites before it actually begins observations.
Right. Yeah. I was trying to get myself coached up earlier today on the GOES T and reading the NASA spaceflight article, which if you'd like to get coached up, it is there for your enjoyment. But yeah, it mentioned that the was it GOES S that it went through its year long of testing before becoming operational, but it encountered some problems in that testing phase.
Yeah, so
Right.
GOES S, which is now designated GOES 17, had a problem with one of its instruments on board. One of the instruments has a cooling system that was being a little temperamental. They have worked around it so far. The satellite is operating well now. I
Is there
believe they had
anything that
some.
they are there any features that they can't use
I
because
think the
of
instrument
it?
is working again. They had
Okay.
some software fixes. It might be operating at a somewhat limited capacity. I don't know if we have the exact details on what the long-term effects were. I know that it is back running in some capacity though. Um,
Um,
uh, but what? Yeah, go ahead, Ian.
I was just going to add, so it's an issue with the cooling system on one of the instruments, and the problem is that instrument has an infrared camera on there, and infrared cameras you need to be cool because infrared is detecting heat. So if your camera's outputting heat, you're just going to see your camera pretty much.
Hmm.
So it's I think in daytime they can't really see anything in infrared. I think it's either daytime or nighttime they can't see anything. But other than that, the instrument does work well now. But they did implement changes and simplifications to the filters on the pump so they won't get clogged again, so you won't have cooling issues.
Yeah, the satellite is built and manufactured by Lockheed Martin for NOAA and NASA, and they, like Ian said, they put some fixes in not just for this satellite, but GOES U, which is the final GOES satellite in this kind of series, will launch on a Falcon Heavy rocket in a couple of years. That satellite also has the same fixes implemented from this mission, so that they don't have that issue again.
That's interesting. Okay, so a satellite that needs to launch on a four solid version of Atlas needs a Falcon Heavy version. It couldn't launch on the Falcon 9, or is it just a heavier satellite? Is it any
So
different?
I believe the GOES U satellite might have an extra instrument or two, more or less it's the same spacecraft.
Hmm.
But even each individual GOES satellite gets minor tweaks and things because it's not like, it's not like the Starlink constellation where you're mass producing satellites. It was R, S, T, and U. There's only four satellites in this series,
Okay.
and they're larger, complex satellites. However, the next mission got awarded to a Falcon Heavy launch. All the previous goes in this series were launched by Atlas V, but that comes from a variety of different factors, right? It might not have been a purely mass constraint issue. The satellite was more or less developed by the time that they were ready to award that particular launch contract. They only awarded it a year or two ago.
Hmm.
And what would have happened is after whatever Goes T was awarded, I would imagine SpaceX was in a more preliminary stage of operating launch services, might not have been to the same track record and reliability record that they are now.
Right.
So Atlas V was a very good choice for government missions at that point. But
Hmm.
whenever Goes U is ready to be bid upon, Falcon Heavy is currently, certified for NASA missions. Falcon 9 obviously is as well, alongside the Atlas and maybe Vulcan. It's also possible that Goes U was actually a result of Atlas was going to be retired. Believe not all Atlases had been sold by that point, so it would have been an Atlas bid more likely. But if someone actually knows more than me, feel free to point it out in chat. But I believe it would have been Atlas, might have been Vulcan. Either way, it's not just a matter of the mass. SpaceX might have also said, listen, Falcon Heavy is cheaper than an Atlas 541, and we could also get you closer to your destination orbit because Falcon Heavy's a beast.
Hmm.
And NASA might have said, sounds great, let's do that for the last GOES mission. So it might
Yeah.
not just have been the spacecraft itself. It might have been Falcon Heavy was then ready to go for that mission and offers that extra capability as well.
I think Tori Bruno even said that they didn't even bid for Goes You.
That's possible. There
I
has been a couple
recall
missions
hearing
that
that.
ULA has not bid on simply because Vulcan isn't certified for some bids yet, and Falcon Heavy exists now. So it's like, well, we know we're going to lose to SpaceX because Vulcan isn't ready yet, so why bother, you know?
Yeah, like ULA is in a very tight position right now because all the Atlases are sold, all the Deltas are sold, and Vulcan isn't flying yet and it's not certified. So they're sort of stuck in a bubble. Until Vulcan proves itself on its first 2 missions, they can't really bid for anything.
Yeah.
And that actually touches on a point of discussion that has come up recently. There was another mission that Tori Bruno recently said they weren't even going to bid on. I think it was one of the like telescopes that's coming up.
Nancy Grace Roman.
That one, yes. ULA said they weren't going to bid on that launch, so expect that to go to SpaceX, by the way. But the reason for that being, for the DoD side, so for Space Force missions or NRO missions, stuff like that, those customers are allowed to like presumably certify rockets. Like, we know you're not certified yet, but by the time this mission is ready to go, we know that you will be certified. You'll have flown the flights needed. With, caveats in there that said, if for some reason you're not certified, we have to move it somewhere else. And there might even be like, cash penalties or things like that. But the DoD has the ability to do that. NASA is not allowed to do that based on their contracting structure. So if the rocket isn't certified at the time the bids are solicited, you cannot award the rocket that launch to a certain rocket. So NASA could not have gone, we're going to award this mission to Vulcan because we know Vulcan will be ready in time. They're not allowed to do that. So
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I think
no
that actually
guarantee.
came in.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to add one last thing. I think they came into play with the Europa Clipper mission. So
maybe.
ULA did bid for that, but they were ultimately denied because NASA was like, you're probably not going to have Vulcan certified by the time that I think it was for the critical design review or like the final post-launch.
Yeah,
like,
whatever
go.
milestone where the launch vehicle needs to be ready by. It's not just like
Yeah.
you can have it certified the day before launch. Like, it's not quite like that.
Nope. I think it was like 10 months before launch or something. And they're like, we don't think that you're going to have it ready by then. So we can't give you this contract.
Right. Which
right.
will go away again as soon as Vulcan flies like 1 or 2 flights that reach like the bare minimum milestone for certain certifications. And that'll go away. Hopefully this like next year or so they'll have multiple Vulcan flights under our belt, we hope.
I hope so. I'm gonna some of these super chats right quick. Jim Cavett just saying thanks NSF. Well, thank you, Jim. Throw that up there. Come on, man. And then Josh Halstead saying thanks for the attempted count. Long and the short is there are a whole lot of them.
Yes.
Talking about the launch pads.
I'm very tempted to go through and see if I can come up with a full list, but I feel like that would be very difficult. I'll see what I can do.
Atlantis Space Shuttle is here. Wow.
The real one?
I guess so. I have to take them at their word.
Guest of honor.
Just saying, shh, don't tell Chris I'm here. Let's see. Oh, Atlantis Space Shuttle with another super chat and a question. Was the Atlas series a part of another company before ULA? I don't really remember because my software only has 1 megabyte of RAM.
Atlantis has got jokes.
I wonder if that is Chris.
Yeah, I wouldn't even doubt it. To answer the question, yes. So both the Atlas and Delta lines of rockets came from the 2 parent companies that then merged their launch service programs into United Launch Alliance. So the Delta line came from Boeing. So Delta 2 and Delta 4 were both being operated by Boeing when ULA was created. And then Atlas 5 came from Lockheed Martin. The Vulcan launch vehicle is actually the first ULA developed rocket, which of course it leverages a lot of technology from Atlas and Delta, but as a launch vehicle itself, it is the first actual like ULA rocket.
Right. In fact, they've been testing some things on Atlas before Vulcan comes around, right?
And Delta even. I think some avionics things flew on Delta as well, because they changed their avionics package so that the flight computers were common whether you were flying on Atlas, Delta, or Vulcan. It's the same flight computer now. So they did some of that as well. Also worth noting that Atlas V was also operated by International Launch Services briefly, which was like a American commercial company that was operating commercial Atlas V launches and also commercial Proton launches, the Russian Proton rocket. That company, ILS might still be operating a couple Protons out, but they've stopped offering Atlas.
All right. And then a couple more real quick. John Mark Legister Just saying, to go to beers. Cheers. Okay.
There you go.
Torben Martin Strouch, just €3 and no comment. Thank you very much. And then Musical Wolves. Okay, yeah, we'll go ahead and do this one real quick. Will ULA's Broomstick 5 have issues with engines not being supplied by Russia, causing any launch delays? And
That is a
we're
great
going to talk
question.
more about the Russia and Ukraine stuff a little later, but yeah, we'll take
Yeah,
this.
to briefly answer this question, we will get into a whole lot of Russian invasion effects in a little bit. But short answer is no. ULA has all of the engines they need for Atlas V, all the way through retirement, so ULA will not be affected by that.
All right. And with that, we will move right along. I think we're having some technical issues with Thomas over there, but we can still hear him just fine. Just
You
a
can
little,
hear me, but you can't see me?
just a little frozen. That's all.
Oh, that's
1,000-yard
unfortunate.
stare.
But yeah, so let's move on to the third launch of the week, and this was one that we also got to see here on the Space Coast. Starlink Group 4-9 launching from LC-39A, 49 satellites atop a B-1060. How many flights for that booster now?
That just completed its 11th flight, so that's the third booster in the Falcon 9 fleet to complete 11 flights. And saying it now, like, it doesn't sound that weird for me to say it now, but it's just, when you think about it, it's amazing. 11 flights on one single stage.
Yeah.
Tell it to someone like 6 years ago, and they'd be like, all right, really?
Yeah.
Tell it to someone 10 years ago, and they'd be like, you're not going to refly a stage.
Right.
It's nuts to think about that. But yeah, it was the 11th flight of Booster 1060. It launched from 39A, Historic Complex 39A, and it carried 47 Starlink satellites to orbit. And the reason it has only 47 compared to what we've seen before was 60 satellites a few months ago. They are flying a southeastern trajectory. So instead of flying northeast and sort of riding the east coast of the United States, they fly to the southeast because in the wintertime, off the eastern coast of the United States, the waters are a lot, they're not as calm. It's a lot more violent out there. So if you have your drone ship out there, the recovery weather is not going to be as great as often. So if you go to the calmer seas in the Bahamas, you can launch and land more often and have a better chance of calmer seas.
Yeah.
But another successful Starlink satellite launch, the ninth launch of the fourth group of satellites, and that comes in 4 groups of satellites. So another successful Starlink launch and another successful Falcon launch.
Yeah, I've got the shirt from the first, like the Falcon has landed shirt. It was like one of those SpaceX like patch shirts, where they'll put the patch on the back. And yeah, like you said, if you had told me then that they were going to have 3 boosters at 11 flights, I might not have thought you were crazy, but I would have been blown away that they've come so far. And which one do you think is going to end up being the first to fly 12? We've got, I think the ones up for it would be, let's see, 1058, I think just did its 11th.
Yeah.
1051, I think has done its 11th, and now 1060.
I mean, I would guess SpaceX seems to like flying the newer boosters more often than the older boosters, and that makes sense because over time they put little changes, little improvements into each booster. So booster 1060 is going to be more reliable off the bat than booster 1051. So I would assume probably 1058, since that did its 11th flight a little more previously, but I'd say 51 or 58.
Yeah, looking forward to that. If it's 51, then we could almost expect it to be somewhat soon. If they deem that 51 is ready for another flight, because 58 and 60 obviously they just flew, so it's going to take some time to get those ready for another flight. But
yeah,
I don't remember when the last time it was that 51 flew, but that tells me that it has been long enough that maybe they're ready to fly it again if it is ready to go.
I don't remember. I think. Isn't 51 out at Vandenberg flying those Starlink missions?
It could be.
I feel like they sent it out west.
Yeah, because I think the last one to fly from Vandy was on its 11th flight.
Yeah, okay, it says December 18th was the last launch from last year, so I could see that being up sometime soon for a launch.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Anything else?
You guys have me back, by the
Oh
way.
yeah. Welcome
Yep.
back, Thomas.
I know you can. I can tell you can see me. Just making sure you can
Yeah.
hear me. All right.
Thomas
Cool.
is the chat has already been cheering that Thomas is back.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. My computer got DDoSed by like me talking about Russian engines or something. I don't know. But to go back, we were talking about the boosters that have reached 11 flights. B-1051 did fly out of Vandy most recently on the Starlink Group 4-4 mission. But that's one of the boosters that reached 11 flights, and then like you guys said, 1058 and now 1060.
All right. Let's see if we got any questions that can kind of pertain to what we're talking about now. I like this one. Robbie Rob saying, when a rocket lifts off and all the ground connections are cut, are there any risks to that the rocket tips over by that force?
Like the umbilicals disconnecting?
Yeah.
So
has there ever been one that didn't let go and like pulled the rocket down?
So no, but the inverse has happened. There have been rockets that have dragged umbilicals all the way to orbit. I remember there was a Cargo Dragon mission that brought like electrical connection just like hanging off the side of the capsule, and it like started to approach the station, and the astronauts were like, there's something like outside the capsule, and they like looked at it. It's like, oh yeah, they literally dragged an umbilical all the way to orbit. And like it wasn't really a big deal. Didn't get in the way of anything, and it's so, I mean, compared to the mass of the rocket, it's almost nothing.
Yeah.
So the fact is the rocket can just kind of compensate for it. But yeah, other than that, I think I have a weird memory of like an Atlas once dragging an umbilical too or something. I think it's not super common, but it has happened, and it more or less doesn't really affect anything.
Yeah.
The rocket is way more powerful than the umbilical connection.
Yeah. And plus, you have the other two factors too. The umbilical probably doesn't weigh much. Maybe it weighs like 10, 20 pounds. And to us, that's a lot. But like to a rocket, that's like millions of pounds. That's really nothing. And also too, I think it's called open loop guidance, where a rocket will adjust itself based on the live velocity, the live altitude, and actively adjust its trajectory. So if you have like an extra 10, 20 pounds holding on the side of the rocket, it's going to have no impact really, unless you're flying like a very specific mission. It's not going to have any major impact.
All right. I saw one. I think I saw it over here because I have the main chat scrolling on one side over here, and I think they just misspelled. Yeah, they put NASASpaceflight instead of spaceflight. But Everyday Space Nerd said, "How many times do you think a booster will fly in total? 20 to 50?
Ever?
Question mark. Yeah, ever.
15 plus at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't be
might
shocked.
make 20.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked to see 20, but definitely 15 at least.
I'm honestly, I would not be surprised if Falcon 9 being a retired rocket comes into play before they like this booster literally can't fly again.
Yeah.
Because they'll just keep learning how to make them more reusable. Now, if they reach the limit on a particular booster and say, hey, if we change this thing about the heat shielding, Falcon 9 will be able to fly 5 more flights beyond what this one did, that could happen.
Okay.
But whether or not they'll ever reach a point where like we cannot make Falcon 9 any more reusable than this, say 30 flights or something,
Yeah.
They might not even reach that point before Falcon 9 is just retired. So, so my estimate at least 15.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Until they're just solid charcoal.
Yeah. It'll look like the whole rocket's carbon
looks like
fiber.
Electron. It's so
Yeah.
sooty.
Yep, it's going to look like Electron. Okay, well, speaking of the Starlink launch, last week we talked about how Elon had offered to send over some Starlink terminals to help out with some internet issues that they've been having over there in the Ukraine since being invaded by Russia. And it turns out that some of those terminals have arrived, right?
Yep. Yeah, so there have been Starlink kind of user terminals on the ground in Ukraine. And there's been a lot of actually ongoing discussion about SpaceX's involvement there. I think at some point Elon even mentioned that Starlink was actually the only like operational civilian internet capability in Ukraine. But has also brought to our attention some priorities that SpaceX is now having
Yeah.
regarding the Starlink system. Elon mentioned he will show some. He's been talking a lot about it on Twitter and actually providing some very cool updates. Well, I don't know if cool is the right word, but like important or
Interesting.
useful updates,
Yeah.
right? Saying that some Starlink terminals in Ukraine were being jammed by Russian forces. Sounds like Elon has mentioned that some software updates have allowed the satellite communications to work around that, and that'll probably be an ongoing thing. But you can see the main tweet in this thread is Elon saying SpaceX is reprioritizing to cyber defense and overcoming signal jamming, of course, relating to Starlink. Also mentioning that it might cause slight delays to Starship and Starlink version 2, which is kind of a interesting comment because it wasn't like immediately clear how that played in.
Yeah, well, especially with Starship, because it's not like you're taking the folks down there working in Boca Chica and putting them on figuring out how to not, get jammed.
Like the personnel that's going to be working on that are going to be your electronics people, your radio frequency people, your software people. So if he might be suggesting that the signals and electronics people that work on Starship are being moved to Starlink temporarily, that is potentially feasible and could, in theory, cause delays to Starship. We all know Starship has many other reasons that is kind of waiting around. We're waiting on FAA approval, waiting on ground equipment to be fully ready to go, things like that, vehicle readiness itself. So there are other factors in that conversation as well. So possibly reshifting people around might have a effect. I think a more direct connection, though, is the first operational Starlink missions are flying the Starlink version 2 satellites. And obviously, if their Starlink team are working through these kinds of issues, that might just simply delay the implementation of Starlink version 2 and thus the associated Starship launches.
Right. Okay, let's go through some questions, and that'll help kind of guide us through talking about this. I've got so many up here. Let's see. Okay, here's one from Daniel Kennett saying, what are OneWeb's future launch rocket options for payload capability and orbits?
Right, so this is another effect that is being seen from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There was actually supposed to be this week a Russian Soyuz launch operated by Starsem and Arianespace, Starsem being sort of a commercial arm of Roscosmos, operating commercial launches of the Soyuz rocket. Supposed to be carrying a bunch of OneWeb satellites from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, which is of course operated by Roscosmos. And that mission ended up getting canceled. We're seeing video here of a bizarre effect from the invasion of Russia literally covering some of the flags that are on the payload fairing. OneWeb is kind of a very international program. The satellites are built in the United States. The company's major stakeholder is British. And then all of those countries that you see on that payload fairing are involved in OneWeb in one way, shape, or form. But apparently Roscosmos felt it necessary to cover up some of the flags on the fairing, which is just interesting considering the rocket then didn't fly at all, and Roscosmos has lost a huge source of income in these commercial launches because no international partners are going to be launching on Russian Soyuz rockets now anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, because you might lose your payload. I've seen people ask, and I don't know the answer, but is OneWeb going to be reimbursed for that?
So
are they going to get their satellites back?
Yeah, so there were reports that OneWeb has already paid for this launch, which is why the launch was originally supposed to proceed as scheduled, because all of the sanctions didn't actually technically apply because all the funds had already transferred hands. However, Russia then demanded that the UK remove its stake in OneWeb because of sanctions, and then also there were reported concerns that OneWeb might have a non-civilian purpose, some military applications, which might even be true. However, because OneWeb refused to meet those demands, and Russia said, okay, we're not going to launch it, and they're the operator of the launch vehicle. Whether they get those satellites back, I don't know. I'm not sure how the legal like contracting structure is going to play into that. The satellites are currently sitting in Kazakhstan at the launch site on top of a rocket that will now not fly.
Hmm.
It's a very bizarre situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as so talking about the question though, and Ian, I want to get your thoughts on this too. There's a couple different options and ways they could go. Obviously, their easiest one would be to go to some other European launcher, but all the Ariane 5s have been sold out. Arianespace is no longer operating Soyuz, obviously. So you're left with, actually, the current version of Vega is also already sold out. So it'd have to be Vega C or Ariane 6, both of which are not flying yet. So OneWeb could sit around and wait for either of those rockets, or they could look elsewhere. They could look to the United States. Falcon 9 is an obvious choice. However, you're then funding one of your competitors because SpaceX also is Starlink. Um, a counterpoint to that is that Starlink and OneWeb do kind of target different customer bases. Starlink is you buy one for your house and it's your home internet. OneWeb is kind of used for like institutional kind of government customers or company customers. And so maybe there's not really a direct competitor. And also Elon has mentioned in the past that or SpaceX would be willing to launch other satellite internet constellations other than Starlink. So maybe that's the most feasible option considering Falcon 9 is flying now and could support their launch cadence relatively quickly. I don't know, Ian, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's confusing because on one hand you have SpaceX. Falcon 9 is like the really obvious option, like you said, because it's the cheap, reliable, it's there. It's always going to be there for now. Um, but at the same time, if you pay to launch on Falcon 9, you're funding Starlink. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot there. Um, but on the other hand, you can't really go anywhere else because the Ariane 5s are sold out, the Delta 4s are sold out, the Atlases are sold out. I think really the only good option would be to go to India on the PSLV GSLV series. I'm not sure exactly what rockets would be best fit for that. I don't know if they could do a long March launch with China, but they're definitely in a really tricky situation, and they might just be waiting to see what happens here because it's a very fluid, very quickly developing situation. We don't know what it's going to look like in a month. So,
I think that in terms of whether or not they would choose to fly on a Falcon 9, I get, not wanting to pay a competitor, but it's also true that whether or not they fly on Falcon 9, that's not going to affect the success or failure of Starlink.
Right.
So, yeah, you don't really want to pay your competitor to use their services, but it's not like your decision is going to make or break your
Hmm.
competitor. So they're going to
Exactly.
succeed or fail regardless of if you pay them for their service. So it's not really shooting yourself in the foot that much.
I
yeah.
agree.
And at the same time, it's also important to remember, I kind of just remembered it. Starlink and OneWeb are not direct one-on-one competitors.
Right.
Hmm.
Starlink is meant to be a more civilian network, also commercial. It's really like a big, just general overall internet network, but mostly for civilians. Whereas OneWeb is really commercial. So like shipping, airplanes, just businesses in general is what OneWeb is catering to. They're not supposed to have hundreds of thousands of terminals around the globe, have millions of people connected. So they are kind of competitors, but they're not really competitors, and that's
They're
that's
not the
another
same
important
thing.
factor.
Yeah.
Another point also, I mean, you mentioned India, and that's been one kind of name that's been thrown around as far as launch service options for OneWeb, but India doesn't have that high of a launch cadence. They've launched more frequently in the past, but recently they've been launching every couple months, and that is not enough to sustain the same cadence. Like they were having monthly launches on the Soyuz launches, and
Hmm.
so looking at other options, the only one that can really match that cadence is SpaceX. ULA, even with Vulcan, which is not online yet, but once Vulcan came online, I'm not. Does Vulcan have the capability to add one launch every single month, in addition to all the other customers that Vulcan has? That's another consideration you have to take into account. Um, China is an interesting idea. Not sure if OneWeb is willing to work with the Chinese space program. There are not dissimilar concerns with working with Russia at this point.
Yeah.
So Japan, but the H3 rocket is not quite online yet. All the small sat launch providers, obviously, you'd need way more launches because you can only launch one or two satellites at a time. So that's probably not feasible. I really do think Falcon 9 would be their best choice. And I think, like you guys have mentioned, even if it's not the ideal situation, the fact is that it will not affect the success of Starlink and would be the most affordable way for them to get their satellites on board.
Yeah.
And I think another interesting thing too, I was actually looking it up while you were talking. The Soyuz fairing that OneWeb uses is 3.8 meters in diameter, whereas Falcon 9's is 5.7, or sorry, 5.4. Now that kind of means that if OneWeb wanted to, they can launch more satellites on a Falcon 9 than they could on a Soyuz.
True.
Again, that's not as simple as just throwing a ton of satellites in the fairing, closing it up, and launching. They would need to make a custom adapter, yada yada, things like that. But a Falcon 9 is definitely not a bad scenario for launching, I don't think. In fact, you can get more satellites to orbit at once.
Mhm.
But again, it's going to be a situation where we have to wait and see exactly what they choose to do.
Yeah. Here's another question about the effects on spaceflight. Maybe on a stick asking, I heard that there are enough engines for 2 Antares launches, but do we know how many first stages are ready or at least already in the US?
Yes.
Those first
So
stages are constructed in the Ukraine, right?
right. So Antares, believe it or not, is not really an American rocket. It's an American operated rocket. But the first stage is built in Ukraine, and the first stage engines are Russian. And we were showing a brief screenshot earlier of a quote from Dmitry Rogozin, the head of Roscosmos, here it is, who said, "Let them fly on their broomsticks," talking about Russia will no longer be delivering rocket engines to the United States. Now, this is not an entirely new issue. We've already talked about how ULA's Atlas V rocket uses the Russian engine, which originally was part of an effort to foster cooperation between our countries. That worked out well. And so the Atlas V has been retired. All of the engines for those missions are already in the United States, and Atlas V is being retired in favor of Vulcan, which uses all American propulsion. Um, Antares is a similar issue. However, Antares was not already planned to be retired because of this Russian engine issue. All of the materials needed for 2 more Antares flights are here in the United States already. So that includes the first stage, structure, and the engines. Those are also the last 2 Antares flights that have been currently ordered by NASA for the Commercial Resupply Services program. And so if there are going to be any more Antares missions beyond that, then there will be an issue. However, there are a couple of ways that they can go about this. Antares could be redesigned for a new engine, whether that's sort of the AR1 engine has been thrown around a lot, which was one of the options that was also considered for Vulcan before they chose the BE4. It's a kerosene engine, just like Antares is currently a kerosene rocket, so maybe that design work would be relatively straightforward. But re-engineering a rocket is still not super easy, but that's one option. The other option is moving the Cygnus cargo spacecraft to a rocket that is not Antares, and simply retiring the Antares rocket after these next 2 flights. Cygnus is launch vehicle agnostic, which means it can fly on pretty much any launch vehicle with the upmass capability. It has already flown on the Atlas V rocket before, back when Antares got grounded for some issues. That is still an option that they have, but you could also launch Cygnus on any number of missions, potentially even Falcon 9. But yeah, 2 Antares flights worth of material is already here in the United States and ready to be used for those 2 missions.
All
Yep.
right. Um, Here, let's see if y'all know anything about this one. Daniel Morin saying regarding Ukraine, what will be the impact on the MLS's plan to open a launch site in Nova Scotia, Canada in 2023, since it is supposed to launch Ukrainian Cyclone 4M rockets?
So, because it is a Ukrainian provider, obviously the Ukrainian company themselves might be affected by
Mhm.
the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, but Canada's not going to block Ukraine from conducting their operation in Canada because they're on the same side, right? If it was a Russian entity, then we'd have a problem. But the sanctions, and effects of this invasion won't be against Ukrainian entities like that. So it is purely a matter of the Ukrainian company themselves being affected by what's going on in their country.
All right. And let's see. Let's talk about the astronauts that are in space right now. D1 asking, when the astronauts come back on the Soyuz, does that mean they will be landing in Kazakhstan?
Yep. So all Soyuz missions that bring astronauts back do land in Kazakhstan. That's standard procedure. The next Soyuz mission to return will be Soyuz MS-19. That is the only Soyuz spacecraft currently on orbit. And assigned to that mission is Mark Vande Hei, a NASA astronaut, along with the two Russian cosmonauts that are currently on board station. As of this week, there was actually a briefing on the upcoming Axiom-1 mission, which was a commercial Crew Dragon mission to the station on SpaceX Falcon 9. And during that briefing, I actually had a chance to talk to Kathy Loiters at NASA, who said that the current plan is still to return Mark Vande Hei to Earth aboard that Soyuz mission and land in Kazakhstan. She also mentioned, quote, "We are not getting that any indications at a working level that our counterparts are not committed to ongoing operation of the International Space Station."
Which is sort of contrary to a certain video that was released, a simulated video. I don't know if Michael can throw that up here.
Yeah, so and I think I want to make just an important separation here, because there's what Rogozin, the head of Roscosmos, is saying publicly, and there's what the actual engineers and technicians and mission operators
Astronauts
and
the
astronauts,
the
what
people
they
on the
think.
ground, yeah.
Those two things are actually separate entities. Rogozin is a politician, and so Rogozin has been making a lot of pretty intense rhetoric about this whole situation. Depending on how you interpret things, some of these are legitimate, just threatening to close off certain things. This video posted by him appears to be threatening that the Russian cosmonauts will simply button off the hatch between the US operating segment and the Russian segment and let the Russian segment drift off into space. To be very clear, if they actually did that, the Russian segment would be dead, because it literally doesn't even have the power generation capabilities to fly on its own. So that's problem number one. But anyway, I mean, there's that going on. And then on the other side, we haven't really heard from the cosmonauts too, so I won't speak on that end. But the people working in mission control in Moscow and the Russian counterparts to the NASA flight controllers here in the States all seem to be fully intent on continuing operations as normal as far as cooperating with the International Space Station program. Now, does that change once Vande Hei gets back to Earth? Maybe. The next Russian mission, the Soyuz mission after that, MS-20, is an all-Russian crew, no Americans or Europeans on that flight. And I don't believe actually there are any currently scheduled NASA astronauts or European astronauts assigned to further Soyuz missions at this moment. So
there was a Russian cosmonaut assigned to an upcoming Dragon, right?
There was, or at least it was in work. I'm not sure how official that assignment actually became, but it is safe to say that that's not going to happen anymore. And the fact is, the launch services to get to and from station are going to become separated now. Russians will fly on Soyuz. Countries that are still cooperating with Russia, not that there's going to be many of those, could fly on Soyuz. But otherwise, Crew Dragon is going to be exclusively used by Western countries. So United States, Canada, Europe, Japan, those kind of nations can fly on Crew Dragon, but not Russians.
I'll throw this one in here just since we're talking about it. David Sladkey saying, can they use the extra seats in Dragon to bring Mark Vande Hei home? I know they intended to use maximum of 4, but if it is an extraordinary situation like this one.
A very good question, and this is one that got asked during that Axiom-1 briefing by Eric Berger, actually. He stole my question before I could ask it. But Crew Dragon, Crew Dragon only has the 4 seats. It was, in theory, designed at 1.2 half 7, but it only has 4, and the fact is it's not easy to add seats 5, 6, or 7. The question that we asked at this briefing was, could Axiom-1 or the upcoming Crew 4 mission, 2 Crew Dragon missions that are coming up, could either of them launch with an empty seat, take one of the astronauts off either of those flights, and have Vande Hei stay on the station a little while longer and come back on those missions? That was the question that we asked, and the answer was Loiter saying that the plan is still for Vande Hei to come back on Soyuz. Could that plan be revisited? Of course. Vande Hei has already been on the station for a while, but could stay longer if needed to, especially if it is literally unsafe to return on Soyuz, because we don't know what would happen once they get back on the ground. But no indications that that plan has been revisited yet.
All right. I'm going to hit a couple of these super chats right quick, especially the ones that pertain to this. CD Knight, Cape Town, saying, is Dmitry Rogozin acting like Sacha Baron Cohen's Borat, a deliberate act? Is he completely overacting just to keep Putin happy? Your thoughts? I don't know. I don't know the man.
I don't know if I want to delve into that. I'm not
Yeah.
going to claim to be a Russian politics expert or anything like that. But
it is surprising the way he's acted. But yeah, I get your sentiment.
I will point out the drastic differences between what we're hearing from the NASA people that are working with Roscosmos and Rogozin himself. The fact is, we're getting two different messages there, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Yep.
And then Torben Martin Strauch saying I think that this was from a little while back. They were, I don't know. Now I do some comments. I'm not sure what they're referring to there, but thank you for the support. We appreciate that. Marcus, I'm not going to try to say your last name because I don't think I'll get it. Saying, is SpaceX prioritizing certain orbits now to serve Starlink conflict areas? Do we know their coverage plan? And I don't think, because I don't think you really can, because it's not like you just park a satellite over the Ukraine and now Ukraine is covered, right?
Right. So if Ukraine was at a latitude that wasn't already reached by Starlink coverage, and one of the future shells that might not have been filled yet was needed for that coverage area, then maybe SpaceX would have said, we'll start filling that shell next so that we can get more service in Ukraine. But Ukraine's already in the band that is serviced by Starlink, so no changes to the actual launches would change anything.
Right. Okay, and then, go ahead.
I was just saying, it is worth mentioning the tweet that we brought on screen here. That's actually the president of Ukraine that apparently had a meeting with Elon Musk, presumably about the Starlink capabilities,
right.
and also talked about apparently some other possible space projects. Safe to say he's got more important things to worry about at this exact moment, but something interesting to keep in mind.
And then Thomas and Fang, I guess we already touched on this, but we do want to thank you for the support. Asking about Mark Vande Hey's return vehicle, whether or not it's in question. Musical Wolves asking, is SpaceX the only choice for a while? Maybe talking about the OneWeb thing we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, go ahead, Ian.
I'm like we said before, it's tricky because SpaceX is kind of the shining example or like the shining option, like probably the number one option, but it's not the only option. And actually, during the show, I was actually looking up. OneWeb had 38 launches with Virgin Orbit to launch their satellites to orbit. It would have been like 4 satellites per launch or so. But when they moved to Soyuz, they canceled those launches. So Virgin Orbit, I'm actually thinking, could be a good secondary option. And I think they've even actually recontracted with Virgin Orbit to do satellite, not sure what the word is, but
like replenishment?
Yeah, replenishment, that's the word. Yeah, satellite replenishment. So as satellites naturally die on orbit, they'll launch like 2 to 4, like once or twice a year to replenish the satellites. Maybe they could ramp that up to be an actual satellite deployment instead of just satellite replenishment.
Didn't OneWeb also have a contract with New Glenn at some point? Might even still have it.
I don't know that, but to be honest,
off the top of my head, that's in my head somewhere. But I could also be confusing it with a different constellation or something.
Yeah,
it wasn't Kuiper, because Kuiper's only booked with ULA.
I think like Intelsat or Telesat or something had a constellation.
Maybe it was Telesat. Hold on, I'm gonna do some Googling. You guys can keep talking.
Okay, yeah. While you're Googling, I'm gonna thank John Depker and read this question, and thank you for the support. How many U.S. rockets actually use Russian engines, and couldn't we just reverse engineer them and make them ourselves instead, or instead of redesigning all new rockets?
Well, ULA actually already planned on that. So back before Vulcan was really a thing and they were trying to figure out whether Atlas V was the future or if they needed to make a new rocket, they either bought or acquired the plans and the manufacturing techniques to build the RD-180 engine so that either ULA or Aerojet Rocketdyne could build American RD-180s in the United States. The status of that contract, I do not know, but I don't think that's extremely relevant right now because RD-180, while it is similar to the RD-181 on Antares, they're not the same engines. But also on top of that, if you were to rebuild them for Atlas V, there's no Atlas V first stages or Centaurs or anything to launch them on. So it's kind of a dead end street right now.
Okay.
So I have an
Go
answer.
ahead.
OneWeb did sign a launch contract for New Glenn with Blue Origin back in 2017. Sounds like 5 initial launches were contracted for. I do not know the current status of that contract, but at one point that was a thing. Blue Origin also did sign a contract with Telesat. So Telesat was also a thing for New Glenn as well.
Okay.
But I did not make the OneWeb part up, which is cool.
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say one last thing. Like New Glenn is, no offense to Blue Origin, New Glenn is not something you should bank on right now for
Sure.
launches.
At least not in the near term.
Yeah, in the near term. If we're talking like 2027, absolutely. But right now, 2024 kind of has a question mark by it for a Vulcan launch, or sorry, a New Glenn launch date.
I'm so sad.
Yeah.
I'm
That's
really
gonna be an
ready to
awesome
see it.
rocket to see fly.
I
I
know,
cannot
it really
wait.
is. And then John, who we just read his question, put the question in twice and threw $20 at us twice. So I'll throw your name up there twice, John. Thank you so much. And then Thomas Anfang saying, what happens if Russia just walks away from the ISS? Does NASA even have contingency plans? The soonest Axiom station could be ready is 2027.
So, and this is actually a question that I still have and have not gotten an answer to yet. I don't know what happens if Russia and the United States have conflicting commands for the ISS. Like, I don't know, Russia wants to deorbit their stuff, but it's still attached to the rest of the ISS. And like, what happens if there's literally a disagreement there? I think that's an extreme example, but if in the broader sense, literally the Russian segment was literally just evacuated by Russian cosmonauts and they won't fly Russian cosmonauts there anymore. I think like the United States astronauts have all the knowledge about how to operate the Russian segment needed because they cross-train like that.
Okay.
So, you know, American and European astronauts or Japanese astronauts, you know, all the different nationalities that operate on the other side of the station could still operate the rest of the station. One potential difficulty would be getting extra people up there because there are only 2 docking ports that can be used by Crew Dragon right now, and eventually Starliner, of course.
Yeah.
All the docking ports on the Russian segment are only used by Soyuz and Progress. So the idea of an adapter from that docking port to the docking port used by SpaceX and Boeing is perfectly possible if you needed more docking capability. Also, when the Axiom modules do start arriving at the ISS, they will also include some additional docking ports. But again, like the question mentions, that's a little bit of a ways away. So as far as what would happen if cosmonauts literally just disappeared from the station, it's possible the station would just operate at a more limited capacity and not have those Russian crew members on board, but
Would
not
we just
entirely sure.
replace them and have more Americans and Canadians and
Europeans,
Japanese people?
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I mean, the station's operated on a skeleton crew before. I think after the Columbia accident, there was an American and a Russian on the station at all times, and that was it. And that was enough to keep the station up and running. But to be fair, the station today is much larger. There's more mechanical problems, but still, if you have 4 astronauts coming up on a Dragon and you have 4 on the station at all time, that's not bad because it's operated on 3 all the time before.
Yeah.
So, and there have also been plans too. I have no idea how deep these plans go, or if it was just a comment at one point, but there was a proposal, or at least an idea, to add a docking adapter to the new pre-child docking node that could allow Crew Dragon or Starliner to dock to there, because there's really no plan to use the pre-child node in the near future.
All right. So then this question is going to be purely hypothetical because it sounds like we don't expect the Russian segment to leave the ISS, but
Correct. That is an unlikely outcome at this point.
so this is purely hypothetical. Marina Repan saying, how do you think SpaceX will ensure reboost for ISS instead of the Russian system, and how quickly could that be done?
So I'm going to back up a little bit. This conversation did take place on Twitter. I think they got the show even talked about it last week because Elon did mention that, oh, by the way, it's pretty relatively straightforward to develop a reboost capability using the Dragon spacecraft. Right now, As of now, all ISS reboots have been conducted by the Russian Progress spacecraft while it's docked. However, the Cygnus spacecraft from Northrop Grumman that just arrived at the station is already scheduled to do a reboost during its mission operationally. So the Cygnus spacecraft has reboost capability already. Granted, there's the problem we talked about earlier by the fact that there might only be 2 Cygnus missions left. So the question is, Crew Dragon or Cargo Dragon, could it be used for reboost? Answer is yes. I don't know what the easiest way to do that would be, whether it's literally like develop a small propulsion module that can sit in Dragon's trunk and operate from there, or if for somehow the Dragon capsule would use its RCS thrusters. I don't think you'd want to use like the abort motors because I think that's a little overpowered. Although someone tried in Kerbal will tell me how it goes. But otherwise, I think the more likely outcome is they develop some sort of module that can be integrated with Dragon's trunk and used for reboost capability.
Yeah.
Or some payload that gets mounted to the exterior of the station somewhere else by a spacewalk or the robotic arm or something, and that gets used or something. There's other ways to develop that kind of capability. There are modules on the US segment, I believe, that also have thrusters already built into them. I don't think they're used very often, but there are other options as well for maintaining control of the ISS without a Russian segment.
We have a space station because we're innovative. So
Yes.
if there's a problem, we will figure out a way to solve it. Let's see. This is kind of interesting, and I don't know if we'll know the answer. We might need a Chris for one of these for a question like this. Is the Russian section considered sovereign soil like an embassy?
That is a very good question that I actually know the answer to because I had to Google
Yes.
it the other day because someone asked me the same question.
Cool.
So the US operating segment, which you'll see abbreviated USOS, so if you see coverage about the ISS program, USOS stands for US operating segment and actually includes a lot of European operations, Canadian operations, Japanese operations, etc., etc.
Okay.
But that side of the station is considered US soil, and the Russian segment is considered Russian soil, apparently.
Okay.
And that is baked into the International Space Station Agreement that those 2 countries signed. I don't know if more countries than the US and Russia also had to sign that, but either way, that is apparently the original legal structure. Now, does that change when Russia invades a sovereign country here on Earth and then abandons the ISS? I have no idea because I'm not a lawyer, but
Right.
that is the original legal structure behind who owns the ISS, basically.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, good. Yeah, that was a good question and good answer. Let's see. Jaden Litolf saying, Ukraine president talking about future SpaceX collaborations after the war. I don't think there was any info on exactly what that could mean.
Right, yeah. He just talked about like future space projects, which who knows what that could mean,
Who
but
knows?
yes.
Yeah, okay. And then Lee Sully saying, does SpaceX have the ability to step up a crewed launch cadence to replace the Russian crew launches?
I think that's a very good question. You would have to either produce more Crew Dragon spacecraft or turn them around faster. And also just make sure you have the slots available to launch from 39A, although I think that'd be pretty easy to do. I think SpaceX told if NASA went to SpaceX and said, "Hey, can you launch twice as many Crew Dragon missions as you're already scheduled to?" SpaceX would say yes, and then they'd go do it. But it wouldn't be trivial. They'd have to put the work in, but I would say that capability can be there if SpaceX wants it to be.
And again, this is that totally hypothetical situation that we do not expect to happen. The things that we see on social media and hear from politicians do not always match the actual experience of the people doing the work, of the astronauts on board the space station and the people on the ground that are supporting them. It's definitely something worth keeping in mind with all this kind of stuff. Like, I'm sure that up there on the space station, they're not like at each other's throats. They're, I'm sure they're friendly up there right now.
Yeah.
It would be amazing to have the perspective of the current ISS crew on current events.
Yes, I would love.
Especially, and I also pointed this out on Twitter last week. The current commander of the ISS was actually born in the Ukrainian SSR during the Soviet Union, in Crimea, nonetheless. So another interesting perspective that might be involved there. I should also mention, before we go back to this question, Crew Dragon is currently flying at pretty much twice the cadence that it's supposed to be anyway, because Starliner isn't flying yet. So if you add Starliner rotations and just keep the Crew Dragon cadence the same, there you go.
Well,
So that's
yeah.
another point. But
And
anyway.
then, well, you did that perfectly because Alex Duvall saying, when is the most likely launch date of Starliner? I see mid-May online. Is this likely?
That is, yeah, go ahead, Ian.
Likely, that's a good question. But yeah, May is the current timeline as far as I'm aware for OFT2. We haven't really got many updates on that, but I guess no news is good news in this sense. However, I wouldn't hold my breath for a May launch, but it doesn't seem impossible right now, given that we are 2 months away from May.
Yeah.
Yeah, OFT2 May-ish time frame, and then you've got a crewed flight test, which could become a crew rotation mission. NASA has already talked about that, using the crewed flight as, as long as you're flying humans on it, might as well put a full crew on it. So that could become a thing if necessary, and then obviously operational missions after that. So as far as Starliner delivering crew capability back to the ISS, that would not happen until near the end of this year at the very earliest, maybe next year. But that kind of rounds out your point.
Okay. Well, go ahead, Ian.
I was going to say one last thing while we're talking about the ISS before we move on. We discussed about Cygnus and the possible issue of Cygnus not flying again, but that doesn't only leave Cargo Dragon as the only cargo resupply vehicle. Not only is there Dream Chaser, the little mini space shuttle that's coming online next year, question mark?
Next year, question mark, yes.
Yeah, next year, question mark. But there's also the HTVX, which is Japan's new cargo resupply vehicle. HTVX seems to be forgotten a lot, but that's Japan's new advanced vehicle. It'll have unpressurized cargo. It'll have pressurized cargo. It'll be it'll be kind of like Cygnus, sort of, in some aspects. So if we lose Cygnus, that would definitely be a loss. But it's not like we're down to just Cargo Dragon. And also, too, at the same time, no one's saying that Progress is never flying to the station again. We're still going to have Progress delivering cargo. So. Yeah. Losing Cygnus would suck, but we could, like we said, increase the cadence of Cargo Dragon, increase the cadence of Dream Chaser. The ISS is meant to be several backup options.
All right, and we'll close this segment or this topic with a somewhat lighthearted question coming from Spinnaker. Could ISS, abandoned by the Russian propulsion component, be saved by a team of oil riggers led by Bruce Willis to keep it from crashing into the Earth?
Obviously, the answer is yes. So
obviously, we've already seen it. We saw the documentary come out.
I feel like I'm missing some context here.
Ian hasn't seen Armageddon?
Oh,
nope.
Joy. Oh, well, congratulations.
Ian, it's terrible. You have to watch it.
It's terrible and wonderful.
The launch sequence will make you recoil. It's so bad, but you have to watch it.
Space shuttles at once.
All right, Ian's got homework tonight. Anyway,
that's right. Yeah, it's got to be available for streaming somewhere.
I think it's on Netflix.
I don't want homework.
Well, it's the good kind of homework.
Yeah. This is more important.
Let's talk about everybody's favorite topic, Starship.
Oh yeah.
Who wants to get us caught up on what is going on down in Boca Chica?
Ian does. He's better at this than I am.
Okay. Just throw me the ball. But
he's the one that narrated the most recent update video, so he knows what's going on.
Yeah, I guess so. So there's a lot of work going on down at Boca Chica. Not only groundwork, we saw some methane tanks being installed for the orbital launch pad. At the same time, we're seeing work done on Ship 22 and Ship 24. Ship 24 parts are coming online, and it's going to be stacking very soon. We've also seen parts that could be for Ship 25. There was a new aft dome spotted with new pipe work on it, so that was very interesting. We also saw the grid fins for Booster 7. Remember, Booster 7 is inside the high bay right now, being assembled for what may be the first or second orbital flight test. But it is currently undergoing stacking, and we've seen the grid fins, which are now painted white. And yeah, so Booster 7, we also saw the aft dome section of Booster 7 rolled out. Now that is where the engines are mounted to the bottom of the booster. And this was actually different than any other aft dome sections we've seen before because it had a header tank installed. Now this header tank is not the same as the ship header tanks. It's not like a ball looking thing. Rather, it's sort of a soda can looking object. And the point of that is actually to collect liquid oxygen propellant for during landing. And the reason you want to do that is because when the booster's coming into the atmosphere, it's a very dynamic environment. You can actually see it right there, the header tank sticking out. So when the booster's re-entering the atmosphere, there's a lot going on, a lot of shaking, the propellant's moving around in the tanks. Now, if you tried to reignite the engine, there's a pretty good chance that you'll have some liquid over the port to be sucked into the engine. But there's a chance that the propellant could be, say, towards the side of the tank, or there could be a little bubble over that intake. Now, if you intake gas into your engine, you will not have an engine anymore. So they have a header tank, which is completely full of propellant. And even if the ship is moving, propellant in the main tanks are sloshing, the header tank is full of propellant. So they siphon propellant from that tank for the landing burn. But we saw that roll out of the assembly tents recently, and you can see it right here, the very complicated engine section of Booster 7. And those really are the main things going on right now at Boca Chica. We also saw some work on the wide bay, the new high bay, which will support several ships and boosters inside of it.
It's very big.
It's wide, yeah.
Yeah, and wide. Big,
As
deep and wide.
it is named well.
It is named well. But yeah, a lot of groundwork, and there's some groundwork right there. There's a lot of groundwork getting done at Boca Chica, so that eventually they can hit the ground running.
You're not able to go up there and take a selfie with the Starbase sign right now.
They got stuff in the way.
Yep. I imagine people still do it. Stay away from the bulldozers, y'all. There was some cryo testing and stuff too, right?
Yeah, we also did see Booster 4 do another cryogenic test, test number 4, I think, at this point.
Which, by the way, can all be seen on Starbase Live 24/7. Just because there's not a commentated stream doesn't mean that we're not showing it somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So you have 24/7 view. There's several cameras at once on Starbase Live. Very fun to watch. And you actually see here the chopsticks. They're still working on the chopsticks following the successful stacking and then destacking of Ship 20 Top Booster 4. So Booster 4 has done another cryogenic proofing test. This is, I think, the 4th one it's accomplished. We're not sure exactly what they're doing with these tests. Honestly, the most probable cause is testing the ground support, because the orbital launch pad, all this infrastructure is new. There's never been a static fire up until Booster 4. There's never been cryogenic proofing. This pad wasn't operational like 4 months ago. So they're testing everything, making sure everything's ready, because not only do you have to tank a booster, you have to tank a ship. Everything here needs to be working. It's a very complicated, it's a very complicated system here. So interesting to see another cryogenic proofing test. Hopefully we get to see a static fire coming soon, and that is kind of hinted at. We might see some sort of static fire or wet dress rehearsal, because we've seen liquid methane deliveries to the orbital site. So it should be an exciting
really cool
future.
Right there.
Yeah, that was a very cool looking vent there. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Let's see. Did you want to add any more before we start going to the questions?
I think that's good for me. Anything from you, Thomas?
I think you nailed it pretty well. There was Demos.
Let's not forget about Demos. Yeah.
There's so much happening. I can't even remember every little detail.
There's a whole lot.
So this...
All you, Ian.
All right. So what we're looking at right now is Demos. This is one of 2 oil rigs that SpaceX has purchased. And what they are using these oil rigs for is eventually they want to use them as launch and landing platforms out in the Gulf of Mexico, maybe the Atlantic Ocean, but probably just the Gulf of Mexico for now. The other one, Phobos, is currently in, what is it, Pascagoula? Is it called?
So now they're both in Pascagoula, right?
Pascagoula, yep. And Pascagoula is a shipyard where they're doing modifications on the other one, Phobos. Now, both of these are named after the 2 moons of Mars, which is fitting, given the goal of Starship. But yeah, so they're sending them there to do refurbishment work, or conversion work, to take the towers off, to take all the oil equipment off, basically make it just a big flat surface from where they can build a launch tower, a launch mount, and eventually do Starship operations from. Elon has said, I think in the most recent Starship presentation, he actually said they are not a very high priority right now. So it seems like SpaceX is working on them slowly. When they have an opportunity to send some engineers out to do some work, just to do the basic, get all the oil equipment, everything they don't need off of it. And then from there, once they have Boca Chica operational, they'll start really ramping those up as they need them. But so
why did one go to Brownsville and one go to Pascagoula in the first place? Do we know?
Weren't they both in Brownsville at one point?
Did they both start there?
At one point, I think they both started there.
Okay.
Oh no, one was in Galveston. Sorry,
yep.
different part of Texas. Thank you.
I remember Phobos was in Pascagoula for a while. That was the one that they were doing work on, and Demos was sort of mothballed in Brownsville.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if it was actually being actively worked on, Demas. I mean, it doesn't look that different yet.
No, it looks the same as when I saw it last, which was last
Yeah.
summer.
And so I think Phobos was being more actively worked on, and maybe this is a sign that when Deimos goes to Pascagoula, it'll also be more actively worked on.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yep.
All right. And by the way, our good friend Gav Cornwell has been posting updates on this. If you're not following him on Twitter, you should. Let's see.
I will add, in addition to all the Boca Chica stuff, and of course we're going to get a ton of Starship questions, so we'll get into that in a second. But I should also address, especially because I think we put it in the thumbnail, is the stuff that's going on in Florida as well.
Oh yeah.
As if it wasn't tricky enough to follow just Boca Chica.
Right.
Yeah. Now there's two. It's
Yeah.
getting out of hand. Now there's two of them. Or let someone put the GIF somewhere. But anyway, the big thing to point out is what's being shown on screen here, which is it looks like SpaceX is getting ready to build the first tower sections for the launch tower at Kennedy Space Center for Starship. You can see those bases there. They look just like the ones we saw at Boca Chica, and you actually see some of the hardware lying around it are actually the first sections of an actual tower segment. And assuming they'll do the same thing at Florida that they did in Texas, they will build the tower section by section, roll it out to pad 39A, and start building it up step by step with a crane. So that's coming up soon. And for context, it only took about 3 months to do the whole tower in Texas. So
yeah, there were 9 individual segments, right?
yes, I believe so.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the first 7 were all a sort of copy paste of design, and then 8 and 9, because those were the chopsticks lift hardware from, those are of different design. And
Right.
there's one of the segments right there. But Elon did say that it's going to be roughly or almost exactly the same design as Boca Chica, just modified because, of course, they're going to learn lessons. Let's do this. Let's not do this. We can make it cheaper or simpler by combining these things like that.
Now, who out there guessed that concrete ring there was going to be a water tank, or what looks like a water tank? I think I did hear some people saying, maybe it's for a water tower or something, but I didn't. I thought maybe they're gonna make rings there, or I don't know. I didn't expect just like what it looks like, just a simple water tank.
Of course, we have to address the fact that we're not allowed to call anything SpaceX does a water tank, because then they prove us wrong and they fly the thing. So there's always that in the back of your head. We can't just non-hesitantly call it something a water tank anymore.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm having a nightmare where we just see that tank on the orbital launch mount.
Oh, look, we actually talked about it in this update video.
Yeah,
there you go. It was Starhopper.
Yeah, it was a funny little joke there in the middle of the video. Okay, let's hit some questions here as we're coming towards the end of the show. We've got Musical Wolf saying, will the FAA TFRs and NOTAMs show broomstick icons instead of rocket icons?
Oh boy,
that would be awesome, actually.
Okay, Dennis Kunzel saying, could ESA restart ATV production? It used to dock to Russian ports and boost the station.
In theory, what are you going to launch it on?
Yeah, Ariane 6. Cool. When's that launching?
Right. I mean, eventually that could be a thing. There are even longer term plans for a European crew vehicle of some kind that could launch on Ariane 6, but it's not a super near term solution. Some evolved version of the automated transfer vehicle, right? That's what ATV stood for? I think so. It was the cargo vehicle that Europe used to operate for the ISS.
Automated transfer vehicle.
Let me try to keep it with Starship. Rage Boy saying, how will the new booster COPV aero covers be any different from the old setup, if at all?
Your guess is as good as mine.
I can't wait to see.
They just might be just changing the orientation of the COPVs. Yeah. Maybe it won't be anything. Maybe it'll be something. We don't know.
Jonas Tamar's saying, how long will it take? How long will it take when the first Starship can lift off from Florida? Oh yeah, I see what they're saying.
This is always a fun game.
Yeah, it's every week.
Hey, Ian, you guess first.
We can run through it quickly.
If everything goes in their favor, Q4 of this year might be the best case scenario.
Wow.
But given the delays that we've seen at Boca Chica, given the really advanced and really optimistic timelines we've seen, remember July 1st? Anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think this year would be pretty tight to see an orbital launch from Cape Canaveral. Now, seeing a Starship on the pad, a full stack on the pad, I definitely could see that happening within this year.
Yeah.
But in terms of a launch, that's a lot bigger of a step than just having a vehicle on pad.
Yeah.
I'm still not entirely convinced we're going to see any orbital Starship launch this year, and so I am going to very pessimistically say that since they have to build the whole pad at 39A, they have to do an orbital test from Boca, they have to ramp up production in Florida for Starship.
Yeah.
I will say 2024.
Yeah. Well, I don't. 2024, you say?
Wow.
Yes.
I'll go next
I
year.
might
but
be pessimistic there, and I hope I am being pessimistic. I hope it's earlier than that, but that's my guess for Florida specifically.
But I'm with you in that there is a lot of work to do. They've got to build that whole orbital launch table. They've got to do the orbital tank farm. They've got to build the tower. They got to test it all out, make sure it's all working. If there's any problems, there's gonna be problems, and so yeah.
Well, I think they actually kind of have done a bit of pre-work. So they already have a liquid oxygen system at 39A. We've seen back when they were constructing the 2019 orbital launch mount that they were starting to route piping around the pad to get to the Starship pad, to get to Starship mount. I think that they could definitely tap off that again. They'll need to get the methane tanks, which they already have some installed. So they sort of have a head start on the GSE front. And it seems like, based on how quick they're going at Roberts Road, how quick they're going at 39A, they might be fast tracking 39A. Like, sort of, that's their main push right now.
Then there's also that hydrogen tank that is being inspected or something and may possibly become a methane tank.
Yeah, and that was actually, I was talking with, I think, some people when we were doing one of the videos. The hydrogen tank was originally bookmarked by NASA saying, don't touch this is ours. They were going to stage liquid hydrogen there for SLS launches so that when they ran out at 39B, they don't need to truck it from 20 miles away, just go a mile away to 39A and back and forth.
Oh, okay.
They've since changed that to 37B, the Delta 4 pad. So 39A's hydrogen tank may be available now.
Open for
that
business.
Might be just NASA doing inspections, or it might be SpaceX saying, hey, can we turn this to methane?
Okay. Interesting. Let's see. Fly for Fun saying, when is FAA environmental assessment decision due for Boca Chica? As of right now, it's the end of this month, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
but they can also just change that. So it's
totally
not really due ever.
Yeah. Let's see. This is Randy Gibson saying, has the fate of Starship 4/20 been decided yet? Will it be the first launch with the Raptor 1s, or is it going to the Rocket Garden?
I think that has not been officially decided yet.
Yeah, and again, I think that depends. I think that depends also on the whole environmental analysis thing. If they could say, they could say straight up, okay, we need 3 more months on this. They could say that.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're gonna have Booster 7 done. You're gonna have Ship 24 done. It really comes down to just what are they gonna have ready and when are they gonna have it ready? Because if you have a vehicle that's objectively better than a vehicle you already have, why not just use the better vehicle?
Right.
Yeah.
But again, it also comes down to, do you want to risk a much better and a more advanced vehicle on a very risky first test flight?
Right. When the one you have on the pad will do.
Exactly. Yeah. Where it seems like it'll do.
Okay. Let's go through these super chats real quick. Jim Cavett saying, do you guys ever think about a 2-hour Sunday show? Sometimes it becomes that. Or close
Yeah,
to it.
that's true.
Yeah. We have 50 seconds left until we're done.
Yeah. John Depker saying, this reminds me of 2010 when tensions went haywire and crews had to separate from Discovery and Leonov. Anybody want to remind us what that was?
Jeez, we don't have a shuttle expert on hand. Wait, no.
What's Leonov?
I might have to read up on that.
Yeah, we'll have to read up on that. Thank you for giving us some homework. And then let's see, Cinti with just some support. Thank you very much. Mike Smith, what's the status of the water suppression system? Will we see a wet dress rehearsal? or a wet rehearsal, pun intended.
We're talking about Boca.
I think so.
I mean, I don't think we've seen any like really visible testing or anything in, unless you have a better memory than me.
Yeah, I don't think so. And also, it's at the same time, we don't really know what their water suppression system is going to look like. Is it just going to be spraying a little bit of water in just to do sound suppression, or are they going to do Niagara Falls to
Right.
mitigate just making a crater? Because I was actually thinking this today. I'm like, I still don't understand how it's not just going to dig a crater after
Yeah.
the first static fire,
Right.
unless I'm guessing it would be just deluge of water.
Yeah.
That's my guess, but we don't really know anything about that system.
All right, and then Marcus Soul with just a couple bucks and no comment. Thank you very much. And Musical Wolves coming in with what looks like will be our final question. Will cruise starships be launched in Florida only, or will we see a cruise starship launch from Starbase? It's unknown.
Yeah, it's not officially known, so to be very clear, this is a speculation question. I'll say both.
Yeah, I would say both, but I could definitely see the initial coming from Florida because they already have the Dragon infrastructure, the Crew Dragon infrastructure.
Mhm.
You have your crew quarters and everything. So I could see the Polaris 3 mission launching from 39A.
Yeah. And then in the 11th hour, Greg Albright just getting in 20 bucks for us. We appreciate that. No comment, just a little support there, and we definitely appreciate that. And speaking of support, we especially want to thank our members who really keep this thing rolling. That allow us to be able to afford to do some of the things we do and bring you the kind of coverage that we do. And in return, they get access to a special Discord with all of the other, Capcom and above members. So, you know, if this is your thing and you consider yourself a rocket nerd or space fan or what have you, and you want to have a whole community to hang out with, consider being a member. Because we definitely appreciate it, and you also get a ton of people to hang out with in that Discord. And also, they get to see some of these pictures from these Cape flyovers and also from Boca Chica photos from the ground. They get to see that a lot of times long before anybody else gets to see them. So that if that's something that you'd like to be a part of, then consider becoming a member. And with that, I have been your host for this week. My name is Stephen Marr. Joining me were Thomas. Thank you for joining us today. And also,
Always a pleasure. Thanks for everyone for watching.
And also Ian over here. Thank you as well for joining us.
It was a fun show. I'm glad. Thank you for watching.
Yeah, and thank you for watching, everybody. And we'll see y'all next time.
Propulsion continues to be normal.
RCP chamber pressure looks good. Doubling up. Roger, roll, Atlantic.
Water towers can fly!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight SC off. Say again, SC off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.